like a whole like picture of the thing. I'm sorry about that. Maybe in the next few days, if people are still here, we could, get deeper into it. But yeah, so.
What do you mean by server? Or something in a /server?
Yeah,
folder?
something in, yeah.
Something dedicated that run in a dedicated thread? Maybe?
Possibly, yes. So you can also specify, I want it to pause the connection every blah blah blah, and then I want like messages to be dispatched in this thread instead of like in process or physics process.
But basically, after that, like the question is, on the user side, does it change something, or is it something that's maybe?
I think that what it changes from the user perspective is that, well, besides performance, but the user might not notice that. I think that what it changes is that it makes it easier to, much easier to like decide how fast you want the networking, which in turn allows you to know how big the speed of sending or receiving will be. Because if you have a network step of 10 frames per second, you won't be able to receive more than, I don't know, 300 kilobytes per second. I think something like that. It should do the math. So for example, when I did some tests even with the WebSocket trying to download stuff, because with WebSocket you can actually send big files of that second. I noticed that I needed like a 60 or more than 60, 120 frames per second network if you want to send files. Then most of the times you don't want that, and you want actually to be below the 60 frames per second that you do in physics or graphics.
So the question is like, I think the point is like networking in general is how you're going to do the thing will depend a lot on the game you're doing, like how you predict things, how that kind of stuff. This system is just something like that will have if you don't know how to do networking, but does it still allows you to like have the low level stuff?
Yeah. The idea is not to like make it less powerful. The idea is to make some things that are possible right now much easier to do, and which are quite common in networking. So the fixed step, for example, is a very, very common thing people want.
I think it has to be really clear because, well, I didn't get into networking for now, but from the outside it looks quite like kind of complicated because like you got the networking basics, I guess UDP and TCP connection, and on the top of that you got the multiplayer API, Inet. I have no clue what's Inet. So these stuffs are layering, so it has to be pretty clear, maybe for the documentation or something.
Yeah,
like that.
I mean, I think that the server itself will be like, besides configuration in project settings and maybe some like direct call you can do, most users won't care about that beside the settings.
Okay.
And what would make easier for them is they don't have to worry about threading and polling at the right time and synchronizing the results of polls.
So basically you're moving to a server, everything that's about synchronization
and keeping the connection alive.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. I have some doubts because you have said that the connection is in the blocking mode regarding sending. That means that when you have some networking stuff from the above layer, which wants to send some data, that means that you will, if you have, for example, some scheduling problems or networking congestion, so you can queue out of data before you will send them. That means that someone from the other side will receive them too late. Is it much better to, for example, in UDP sockets, to drop this data instead of queuing them? Because you will have in some some situations you will have desynchronization between two nodes. I mean, especially if you are using blocking sockets.
Yeah, again, like Pocket Peer UDP is blocking when sending. The multiplayer API is not, because it disables it internally. And the option to disable that is not expose that in the Packet Peer UDP. Right? So if you use a Packet Peer UDP, right now it's blocking. And I agree it's suboptimal. But we couldn't change the API like we were in a, when I did that, like we didn't want to change the API for breaking changes and so on.
But internally you are using the socket with unknown block.
Yes. On the multiplayer API, yes.
Oh, yes, yes.
But if you use Packet Peer UDP directly,
yeah,
that one is blocking when you do writes.
Okay.
And like you could disable it, but it's not exposed to GDScript, so you can't. But you can, like in C++ inside the engine, you can, which is what we are doing with the multiplayer API. It just was never exposed. Probably deserves to be. But if we go for a bigger change.
Okay, you're looking at me, so I have to speak. Sorry, I'm using microphone because, as I told you, my voice is still a little dry from the plane. I'm not sure. What I always say when we do like contributions and we discuss new features or everything, I'm always insist that we have to discuss things first on a use case basis, not really on a technical proposal basis. I mean, when you want to add a new feature to the engine, usually what I think is that we first need to discuss the use case, accept that the use case is something that we need to fix or improve. And then after we agree that there is a like problem and usability or something like that, then we have to discuss the actual proposals for a solution. In this case, I'm not sure what the problem with the use case is. Usually, what I understand from what you say is about that there isn't a lot of like safety, or it's not very obvious how the polling works and how to get the messages and everything. I will give you an example of how this was solved in a similar case in networking, which was, I actually had an idea on how to solve what you were thinking. The use case here is that if you want to do low-level networking, like open a TCP connection and send messages and everything, you have to do polling yourself. You have to be checking all the time if some data has arrived and get it. This is something that happened when I first implemented the HTTP class, the HTTP client. You just connect and then you have to poll yourself and then you have to get the result yourself. And users were like, hey, this is really difficult because I get blocked or not blocked, and then I have to open a thread to use it. And maybe for someone who is very technically versed, it's very obvious how to use the class. But for somebody who just wanted to like download a file over the internet, using HTTP client was like too complicated. So this is why the HTTP request node was created. The HTTP request node, you just put it and it just works. Like just connect this and you get a signal when the file is done, and it's really simple. I wanted to do something similar for TCP and UDP connections. Just create like I'm not sure what the name is, maybe the TCP node or something like that. We can check the name later. You just put it on the scene and you connect. You can connect like, hey, I got some data, and it does the polling for you and everything. Because the use case in my mind is that if you don't want to do the polling, is because you want to use the main thread, and if you want to do polling, is because you want to use a separate thread. But there's not something like outside that could work as a use case. I mean, if you open a new thread, you probably will do the polling yourself because you know what you're doing. In the HTTP request node, you can choose if you want the polling to happen on a thread on the main thread. You can just choose this and it works the same. It's transparent to the user. So in this case, I think it should probably work the same for a connection. If you just want to make a low-level connection of sending and receiving that, it could just be a node that you can put data into it and get a signal when you get some data, and then it can be transparent, whether it's UDP or TCP or whatever. I think that's probably an easier and simpler solution than going full for a server. Usually servers are something you use when you want to like hide a backend implementation of something. Like you can have like multiple rendering architectures and hide it behind the server. Or for the physics engine, we have Bullet and we have the lot of physics, and we hide both implementation behind the server. With the translation, it's similar. You can use like, for example, a regular translation class that you open from a file. But you can also use a compressed translation. When you have a lot of text, you can choose the server implementation. For scripting, it's also the same. You can put like mini scripting languages like behind the server,